So this call is about token customization. This is actually a pretty exciting feature that is part of the Microsoft Identity Platform that I feel opens up a lot of doors for you when it comes to, customizing or using the power of Azure AD in your applications. So what exactly are we talking about here? So as you know, OpenID Connect, it's all about tokens, and there are three different kinds of tokens. The first token that we need to know about is an access token. An access token typically presented to an API. The API can validate it, and then it can use the claims present in the access token, and it can allow or deny access to something, right? So typically you're calling, let's say, Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph is basically like a big, huge REST API, and the access token coming in, the Microsoft Graph needs to be able to validate it. Now, in the access token, there could be a number of things. One of the things is the validity of an access token. You want to match the signature or validate the signature of the access token. Maybe you also want to look at certain specific claims. So certain access tokens are intended for, have the user's identity in them, and some of them don't. So depending upon the kind of access token you're getting, what the API expects it to be, the functionality could be different. Then you have refresh tokens. Refresh tokens are long-lived tokens. So the thing with access tokens is they're like cash. If it's a $10 bill you find on the road, anybody who picks up that $10 bill, it belongs to them. So there are some new things we're working on, like proof of possession, which go to some extent in solving that problem. And also there is CAE that we rolled out recently, which also allow you to shorten this gap where what happens if there is an access token leakage. So there's some things coming that improve that picture, but generally speaking, with the OpenID Connect OAuth model, access tokens, if somebody picks them, it's theirs to use. That's typically the scenario in the world we're living in today. And the classic workaround to that is that we keep access tokens short as far as time duration goes. So Azure AD access tokens are approximately 1 hour in duration, but it's actually 1 hour, 5 minutes. So it's like a little grace time to renew it, but that's typically how access tokens work. But you don't want to prompt the user to log in every hour. So we have another kind of token called as refresh token, which we don't include by default. We only include if you ask for offline access scope. And also there's a lot of fine print on how long the refresh token remains valid for. So for example, if it's a confidential client application where you have, where you have the ability to store secrets securely, then, we're a little bit more liberal in giving you refresh tokens that last longer. So you use it, it renews, and so on and so forth. Public client, we're a little bit more tight on that. And PIC-C, the refresh token is valid for only 24 hours. Implicit flow, we don't give you refresh tokens, right? Because we don't trust browsers. So there are various scenarios here around refresh token as well, but the overarching goal over here is that a refresh token is used when you need a new access token. Why would you need a new access token? Maybe the previous token is expiring, but that's not the only situation. Maybe you need a new access token for a certain different scope, right? So there are various situations in which you need a new access token. That doesn't invalidate the previous access token, but it prevents the user from seeing a login screen again. Then the third kind of token, that is the ID token. And the purpose of the ID token in OpenID Connect is that it identifies who the user is, right? Now you may say, well, an access token also has a user's identity. It's true, an access token can contain a user's identity, optionally, not always. However, an ID token is, say, for a web application. You sign into the web application, it needs to know who is the user signing in and maybe some other characteristics about them. And that is the purpose of an ID token. Now, in all of these tokens, the challenge is that a refresh token is pretty much like an opaque string. So let's exclude that. An access token can be opaque or maybe not opaque, right? So, but for the API that gets the access token, the API needs to be able to decode it and make sense out of it. So if I am the audience of the access token, it is okay for me to unpack it, but nobody else should unpack it. So for others, it is opaque. What that means is that when I get this token, and per the OpenID Connect spec, this token contains very little information. So one of the challenges we try to fight is that we don't want to do token bloat. We don't want to give you huge tokens because they have other disadvantages, performance disadvantages, browsers, various firewalls, network switches, etc. have issues with them. So we don't want to give you like a really huge token, and that's a good standard. OpenID Connect basically mandates that you must have certain properties in a token, right? These are things that you absolutely must have. But then it says optionally you can have these other things, and then it leaves the door open for you, saying that there are other tokens you can have as well. So you need to customize. The bare minimum set of tokens may not contain the information you need. So the question is, why do we want to customize? Maybe you want to include certain optional claims. For example, maybe you want to light up different parts of your application depending upon who the customer is or who the user is, right? Or maybe, I mean, this can get really crazy. What color shirt are they wearing? It's a very contrived scenario, but applications are, they are very, very flexible. And sometimes you may have custom information in a custom system somewhere that is not part of Azure AD, but you want that information to become available inside the token. Why? Because then you can drive authorization decisions in your applications. Now let's think of this. So the token can have custom claims, and then based on those claims, you may want to drive authorization decisions, or maybe you want to light up different parts of the application. For example, you may say, you have a certain claim value that I don't, so you will be shown a different flow that I won't see. Maybe we have access to the same parts of the application, but you are given a different user interface. That's quite possible. Perhaps the user's language. You logged in from, let's say, Israel, so your user interface will automatically change to Hebrew, and we want to drive that decision based on a claim value that you have, for example, right? So there are different, a lot of examples here. Now you may say, well, why do we want to include that information in a claim? Especially authorization decisions should be done just in time, right? So why don't I, when I'm trying to light up a button, I make a call to an API and then I get authorization decision? The reality is there are pros and cons of each approach. When you do authorization decision based on a claim, that information may be slightly out of date, but maybe that's good enough because it avoids an extra round trip to the server, right? Maybe because of a network outage or in an offline online scenario, the server may not be available, for example. That's entirely possible. So there are different scenarios, but I think we can agree that there is value in being able to put custom claims inside your tokens. So naturally, this is an ability that we support, and this is this is the thrust of today's presentation. There is another parallel feature, and I'm just quickly glancing over the questions. And there's something about like an access token, same as a SAML 2.0 token. And I think somebody answered that. Yes, SAML tokens are different than access tokens. SAML is a different protocol, but we have another capability inside of Azure AD called as claims mapping. So that is not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about something called as optional claims, and when I show you in the user interface, it'll become very clear. So claims mapping is, and another thing that we're working on is claims transformation. That's generally used for like SAML applications where you're moving LOB apps to the cloud, and you want certain information to appear somewhere. So that's what we do over there. But when we talk about optional claims, it's a little more flexible. It is based on a defined schema, works on every application. It's more for OpenID Connect, and that's what I'm talking about today. So what can you customize when it comes to these tokens? As it pertains to OpenID Connect, you can customize the ID token and you can customize the access token. Now in the user interface, you'll also see SAML, and that is the claims mapping part that I was talking about. So yes, technically SAML tokens are also customizable, but that's not a new capability. We've supported SAML token customization through policies for a fairly long time now. Today, I'll be talking about customizing ID tokens and access tokens. So again, an ID token is intended for your client application. Okay, so this is a very important point. In the user interface of Azure AD, you have to tell Azure AD that I want this token to be customized, right? So I want this token to be customized. Where do I specify that? When you want the ID token to be customized, then the request for that customization goes in the client application. So imagine if I have a web application and a web API, the request to customize the ID token will go in the web app, not the API. But the request to customize the access token will go in the API. Now this will become a little bit clearer when I go through the demos, but let me actually show some screenshots here. This is a token intended for Microsoft Graph, right? How do I know that? The audience over there, the GUID for that is Microsoft Graph. So if you say that I want to insert a custom claim in this token, we do not allow that change. And there is absolutely no reason why you should be inserting custom claims in a token intended for Microsoft Graph. The structure of this token is the decision of Microsoft Graph, right? So Microsoft Graph is the audience for this token. Therefore, the AUD claim has the GUID of Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph is the only entity that should be unpacking this token, right? Nobody else, everybody else should treat this token as an opaque string. This is a very, very important concept that I'm talking about, because we have seen over and over again where people customize or want to customize this token, or maybe they unpack this token and they make decisions based on what they see in this token. Now, when we introduce token encryption, which is a best practice anyway, actually we do support token encryption now, but at some point we will turn it on by default, then all of those client applications that are unpacking access tokens not intended for them, those applications will break, right? So this token is intended for Microsoft Graph. You cannot and should not customize this token. However, if this token was intended for your API, then yes, then you can request to customize it, right? And the request to customization will go in the API. How do you customize? It's very simple. You just go through the user interface. There's a section called token configuration. And over there, you just select what kind of token and what claim you wish to see. And you check that checkbox and it'll appear in the output claims. Simple as that. So it's not complicated to customize this at all. Of course, this can be done through the API as well. So one of the things that we are very interested in now, and I'd love your feedback on this as well, is that going forward, we are going to have an API first mentality. As in, if we roll out a new feature, we will also want to roll out an API with it. And in fact, we'll go and backfill APIs in things that are most common scenarios. If there are scenarios that are very important for you that you think you need APIs for, we would like to hear from you. So before I dive into the demos, let me quickly go through the questions. The first question was, is Azure Access Token same as a SAML 2.0 token? The answer is no, because SAML 2.0 is an entirely different flow. It's an entirely different protocol rather. So when we talk of modern identity, it's a little bit of a fuzzy term, but modern identity you can say is WS-Fed, SAML, OAuth and OpenID Connect, right? And maybe down the road, distributed identities. So WS-Fed and SAML are the older part of modern identity. Again, this word modern identity is a little fuzzy. SAML and WS-Fed work on, so they're intended for browsers and they work on redirect flows. And SAML is a little bit more flexible. And both of these protocols have been arm twisted to fit in native applications, mobile applications as well. The way both of these protocols work is that there is a concept of SAML claims and so SAML token format. And the application or the identity provider communicate with each other, say, hey, I think you are such and such person, and here is a SAML token to prove this is who you are, right? And after login, you get such a SAML token and you work with it. Now that SAML token, the format of that is entirely different from what an access token is supposed to be. And the purpose of that is different as well. Now we do have a particular flow where you can trade in a SAML token and get an access token in return. So obviously there are a lot of applications that have a lot of parallel. They say, I want to log in using SAML, but I want to call Microsoft Graph. And scenarios like that and other scenarios, there is way to go from a SAML token to an access token. But yes, SAML token and access tokens are essentially different. Okay, so I think the next question also answered that. So we have a use case for an application to validate an already issued access token on multiple workstations. The application is a thick client and available on multiple stations. Again, the application is not an API, so it should not be validating an access token, right? This is an important point I want to drive home today, is that an access token should be validated by who the access token is intended for. We're happy to talk further into the specific scenario you have for your application. Why do you think you need to validate it on multiple workstations? That sounds like an anti-pattern to me. The workstations, the client applications, should treat that access token as an opaque string. You should not be unpacking it. You should not be validating it. Okay, so Azure tokens are used by OAuth or OpenID. Okay. You can think of OpenID as sort of a mature, next, more standardized version of OAuth. So OAuth is not an authentication protocol. It's an authorization delegation protocol, right? So what I mean by that, like if you've ever gone to one of these news sites and you see an article that has an incendiary headline and there's a comment section down there. And you're like, well, I must share my valuable comment, and you just can't type the comment there. The site wants you to log in, but they have delegated that login to a social identity like Twitter or Facebook, right? So then a redirect happens to Twitter or Facebook, and then Facebook will authenticate you, and then they will inform the news site that you are such and such person, right? But what's happened in this process is that when you go to Facebook, you consent. So you might have seen consent dialogues like this, say, XYZ news site can access my name, my friends list, my blood group, my firstborn's left arm, whatever, right? So these consent screens are a problem, but essentially they are being abused. But this protocol is used as a pseudo authentication protocol. What I mean by that is they ask you for your name. Okay, that's identity, but then they ask for a whole bunch of things they don't really need to know. Like, hey, we're going to give you 100 gigabytes of free storage in our fantastic cloud storage, except we can read all your files. So it's really not free, right? So my point is that OAuth had a way to, tell who the user was, but every identity provider had a different way of doing it. What OpenID connected is that it sort of standardized that. It introduced the concept of a standard claim and an ID token, which must have the user's identity in a certain place. So different applications didn't have to guess. Like Live used to have something called as PID, pretty ID. Facebook had FBID, right? So, and there were literally products written to, denormalize all of that. So OpenID Connect takes all of that out. OpenID Connect sort of standardizes OAuth and says, you will always know who the user is because we're all agreeing on a standard token format, right? So yeah, yes, Azure AD, you might have heard there's like a V1 endpoint and a V2 endpoint. So the V1 endpoint is OAuth and V2 endpoint is OpenID Connect compliant. And that is why we recommend that you go with the V2 endpoint. It's standards compliant. It's a future moving direction. And when you use MCell, you are targeting V2 endpoints, and that is why we're deprecating ADAL. Let's see. So in OAuth, do we have SSL as a requirement? Absolutely. You must have SSL, otherwise a man in the middle can read your tokens, and that would be really bad. So I mean, we can have redirect URL, which is only HTTP, but we should use HTTPS-based redirect URI. Is this correct approach? Okay. No, you must have SSL. SSL all through. That's best practice. The only place where we allow you to bend those rules is if you're using it in dev environment and your redirect URI is localhost. A redirect URI must be HTTPS. All OAuth interactions should go on HTTPS, and even your application ideally should be HTTPS. Okay, any ETA on claims mapping tooling to come out of preview? Customers hesitant to use it. I don't have any ETA on that. Shoot me an email, please, and I'll try and get an ETA for you. No promises. What do we really mean by restricted claims? Can we pass them without any changes through the claim mapping? I think you'll have to define a little bit for me what you mean by restricted claims, but I can venture to guess what you're talking about here. So there's certain claims that we don't allow you to touch, right? For example, there is a KID claim at the top, right? That is an example of a claim that we will not let you customize because that has meaning in the OpenID Connect world. So that is something that we won't let you touch. Maybe I answered your question, I'm not sure. So next question is, but this claims mapping policy is application specific. Can we have these claims available for all apps? The answer is, yeah, you would run a script and you can easily through a script affect all your applications. What we don't have is a default setting where you say any new application in your tenant will automatically get such and such claim. We don't support that, but you can build it. What you can do is that you can push your AAD logs to Event Hub, and through Event Hub, you can fire an Azure function, which can call an API. And anytime a new application gets created, you'll see a log event. Based on that, you can modify the application. So it is achievable, but we don't offer that out of the box. So in short, you request token for graph, then your claims mapping won't work as requested when the token is for graph and not your app. If you want custom claims in the token, you should request the token for your API, right? So your client application can request custom claims in the ID token, but it cannot request custom claims in an access token intended for Microsoft Graph. But it can request custom claims in an access token intended for your API. Can you add the company name? Yes. Can customizations of ID or access tokens be done for multi-tenant clients? Yes. So if you're building software for multiple customers across multiple Azure tenants, will this approach still work? Yes. It's just an application, it'll work for that as well. In fact, you can go even one step further. Say, I will request a custom claim from only this tenant, and this other tenant, I have a different set of custom claims. So you have that option as well. Is token configuration available in the app registration screens? It's not during the app registration, but it's in the same area. I'll show you in the demo where that is. So I can share my use case offline. That's great. Just email me, please. Yes, for localhost, HTTP is allowed because that's for dev purposes. We're not aware of any exploits that localhost HTTP may cause. If you think that's a matter of concern, please email me. But localhost HTTP is something we allow as of now, because if we did HTTP, it will make developers' lives a little harder. Does OIDC support SSO? The answer is yes. So there is nothing baked into OIDC which says this is how you do SSO. It's not part of the OIDC standard. But at the end of the day, you are redirected to an identity provider where you're expected to log in. So it's a web page that shows up. Now, if that identity provider supports SSO, then you have SSO with OIDC or SAML or any other protocol, right? So with Azure AD, we support SSO. So yes, we can do OIDC with SSO. B2C is messing up the token format for custom claims in the ID token. Opened a case with MS, how can we overcome this? So let me pass this link over, but I think the next conversation is about B2C, so that may be a better place for that, but I'll follow up on that Stack Overflow link. How can I implement an app to call APIs of different audiences? Do I need different tokens? The answer is yes, you need different tokens because the token has an audience in it. So when you request a token, you ask what audience you're requesting this token for. So it's the process of asking the token. So it would be great if we can change the sub mapping attribute OOB in B2C specifically instead of having down, okay. So sub might be one of those restricted claims because sub is subject. I'd love to know why you want to change the subject, right? So please share your use case with me on why you want the sub claim to be modified. But that's actually one of the things that I have some mixed feelings about. Like why do you want to change that? Could you request only part of custom claims defined in no? When you say that an ID token has these 5 claims, and you get those 5 claims. The only situation in which you won't get that claim is if there is no value there. For example, I ask for a country claim, but for some reason a certain user doesn't have a country, then maybe they're from the International Space Station, I don't know. but then we won't include that particular claim. Does MS support Pasito? I don't like JOT as you cannot invalidate it. How will CAE invalidate the JOT token? Okay, we have some very good guidance on CAE. It works in parallel with conditional access. I'd love for you to read a little bit more on that and give us some feedback. Why do you think that won't work for you, or how does it fall short of Pasito, or if it meets your needs? So I'd highly recommend that you read that. There are some demos we've put out there when we invalidate a user sign in and immediately their access is revoked, like in a matter of seconds. I think it's a very compelling, it's a very compelling argument. Now, there's a point CAE only works on a few apps, that is correct. However, we do have every intention of expanding that set of apps, including to your custom apps at some point. But yes, hold it out to first-party apps for now. But stay tuned on that. CAE will move very fast. I think you'll see in the next 6 months, there'll be a lot of good changes coming there. Awesome. Okay, so let's move into demos. So let's talk about adding a custom claim in an ID token. So with this, I'll switch into demo mode, and let's go into my Azure portal. So here's my Azure portal. You've seen this before. It's my Azure AD app registration area. As you see here, I went to Azure Active Directory, app registrations, and I have a few apps here. For the purposes of this demo, these are the two apps I'll be talking about. TokenCust web app, TokenCust API. And this is my backup just in case Murphy laws kicks in. But let's hope that doesn't happen. So this here is my web application. What I went is, just created a new registration. And then I went to the authentication tab and I went ahead and specified a redirect URI, added a platform web. So it'll be a web application I'll use, although this will work with any kind of application. This is my redirect URI. And I have a logout URL, which is not necessary for the demo, but I went ahead and specified that anyway. And I said that I want ID tokens out of this. Okay, so that's the change I did. This is not a public client. Then we go to token configuration, and this, let me go ahead and do this for now. So by default, like when you create a new web application, it'll look like this. There will be no optional claims here, right? So with that, let me go ahead and run this web application. So I already have written this code, but this code is basically something I've downloaded from our samples. And it is just a web application. So there are two projects in here. This is using .NET 3x, although it'll work with .NET 5x as well. So this is a to-do list client, and this is a to-do list service. It's calling the world's most important application, which is a list of to-dos, right? And it has a controller that I've added here called to-do list controller, where we'll actually make a call to the API. But for the first demo, I'm interested in only ID token. So what I did is that we don't need to worry about to-do list controller yet. But what I did is that I went to views and I went into index.html and I added this section here, which says if the user is authenticated, then iterate through their claims and just write out the claim values I see here, right? So whatever Azure AD is returning me in the ID token, I am writing out the claims for the user that I see. Simple as that. So let me go ahead and run this. So let me run the project and give it a second. Now for my demos, I'm going to use a different browser so we can see exactly who we are signing in as. So this is Chrome Edge, and let me visit the URL for the application. And as you may expect, it'll ask me to sign in. So I'll go ahead and sign in. So I'm signing in as a live account. So no. And these are the claims I see, right? So AIO, name, etc., 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 right? Now I don't see a country claim in here, CTRY. I don't see that yet. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to go back into my app registration here for the same application, and I'm going to add an optional claim. So add an optional claim. Now, which one should I pick? It'll be the ID token, because I am requesting a new token for this application. So the user's identity must have this new claim. So I'll click ID token and I'll say country. I'll hit add. Now I'll come back to my application Now I'm going to hit refresh, and I still don't see the country claim. Why? Because in just refreshing, I am just reestablishing, working on the session that is established between my browser and the web server. I'm not going back to Azure AD. So I have to go through a full sign out process to get a new claim, because that is what will give me a new ID token. So let me go ahead and hit sign out. Okay, and now I'm going to revisit that application and I'm going to sign in again. If the demo guards are with me, I should see the country claim. That's how simple it is. It was a matter of checking a checkbox, and now I see the country claim. So if there are any questions on these, I'm monitoring the chat. I see there's a comment 5. I'll take that as a 5 out of 5 demo. Thank you. But that's how simple it is. It's a matter of checking a checkbox, and now you have the country claim available. Okay, let me go ahead and delete this. So that's basically our first demo. It was really simple to add a claim. Would you say this was difficult? It's literally checking a checkbox. Okay, next. Now we need to add a custom claim in the access token, right? How do we do that? So let's go look at my app registrations again. And in my app registrations, I have a TokenCust web app and a TokenCust API. So this web app is going to call this API. And if I look here in the TokenCust API, I have an expose an API section in which I've set up an app ID URI, and I've set up a scope access as user. It's a delegated scope. And inside of my web application, under API permissions, I have already added and granted consent for that particular scope, right? So the permissions are already set up. I have also set up a secret here because I need this secret as a confidential client to ask for an access token. So that I'll be asking for an access token for this TokenCust API. And if I go into token configuration, this was just me rehearsing the demo. So let's remove this. So here we go. So right now I'm not asking for any optional claims. So now I'm going to go back into my project here, which is still running. And I'm going to go back into the browser. And if I click this to-do list, what it will do is that it'll run this to-do list controller, and eventually it is going to run this service, to-do list service. And there's a whole bunch of code here, but this is the line we're interested in, is that it will get an access token for the to-do list scope, right? So when I ask for an access token, I specify what scope. That answers your previous question of, if I want to ask for an access token for graph, I would just put a graph scope in here. So I'm going to ask for an access token, and then when we get the access token, it'll be a string. We will hit this breakpoint, and then we can examine what that token looks like. So let me go ahead and click this to-do list here. So as expected, this breakpoint gets hit. Let me grab this access token. So that's the access token. And let me go ahead and decode it. So there's a site we have. There are many ways to decode it, but here's a site we have which allows you to decode it. And if I look at this access token, so again, because I had already signed in, let me sign in and sign out. Like this was, sorry, the demo guards playing. I should have deleted those customizations. So let me go ahead and hit play. And I'm going to go ahead and sign in, sign out. So give me just a moment. So hit sign out. So localhost 44321. Let me make sure that my app registration, I hit the save button. Yeah, okay. Now let's go ahead and hit sign in. This time, okay, let's sign in using the same user. That's fine. And if I hit to-do list, and let's grab the access token. So sometimes like MSAL cache can do weird things as well, but I may need to restart the web server to get rid of that problem. However, okay, I need to restart the web server for this IP address to go away, but that's the essence. Let me actually do that. Let's one more try, and if it doesn't work, we'll move along. I think the MSAL cache is messing things up. We have caching built on the server in MSAL, and that is causing this. But it's okay. We see these problems, and if you ever run into these in your dev environment, you'll know why. So let's go ahead and visit that same URL again. Localhost 44321. Let me bring it here. I'm going to go ahead and hit sign out. Actually, let me restart the server again because I didn't sign out over there. So stop, run again. And let's go to Edge, localhost 44321. Let's go ahead and sign in. Sign in. No. And in the access token now, I am hoping that it should not contain the IP address. Hold on. Let's copy this. Decode this. Oh, so something's wrong with my demo. I'll explore that offline later. But the idea over here is that in the API, if I don't request for an IP address, I shouldn't see one. I'm not sure why we're getting one. Let me just do one last try here. As I said, don't fix things on the fly, but let's do it anyway. Let me sign in as a different user. Maybe that'll invalidate the cache. It is the cache that is causing this problem. So let me sign in as an entirely different user. So let's go ahead and visit localhost again. Sign in. And to-do list. Access token. Hold on, let's copy paste. This should be it's like a eye test to try and copy this access token. And if you don't move there fast enough, the tooltip gets in the way. So access token, and let's go ahead and decode it. Paste, and I still see IP address. So I'm not sure why it's going on. Might be some caching built in there, but I did remove it. So, but that's the theory that I think something's wrong. It might be some caching built in there, but that's the theory that checking that checkbox here. So I go to optional claims in the API and choose access token here. That should include that. Actually, okay, let's see how much time we have, because there's one more demo I want to go through. But we could just check another token here. Okay, let's just do it. So ID type token. So whether this is an app only token, right? So that's a new one we introduced recently. So just introduce a brand new claim. So this should take care of the caching issue. And let me go ahead and hit sign out. I need to run the application again. Play. So the ID type token was earlier, but now when I hit sign out and sign in, I'm hoping I'll see the ID type token. But then this is a delegated access tokens. For that reason, it may not show up. But let's try. So let's go ahead and sign in. And I don't see ID. No, it should go in the access token. So to-do list. And let's grab the access token. So I didn't pick a good example because that claim may not show up because this is not an app only access token. But let's see, ID type. No, it doesn't show up because not yeah. So sorry, this demo didn't work. But the theory here is that the IP address claim, if I just gave it some time, it'll go away. But it's a caching issue on AD side. So that's what's going on. Okay, let's move to the next demo. So there is some comments here. Let's quickly read through them. So if the AD application is delegating permissions to another application, which of the two applications should we add the optional claims? So I believe you're talking about here for the API. So I mean, I think I need a little more clarification on the question, as in, are you talking about on behalf of Flow? What do you mean by delegating permission? So I think I need to understand that question better. There is no user endpoint in AAD B2C. Why can't Microsoft make it simple to call Graph app from B2C? For such simple things, you have to struggle. So, okay, so we don't have the ability right now that you log into AAD B2C and call Graph under delegated permissions, right? Because the IDPs are different. So Graph is an API secured by Azure AD, whereas Azure AD B2C is, for all practical purposes, a different IDP. So that's why we don't accept those tokens. However, if you want to call under application permissions, that's pretty straightforward. That should work today. So I like the fact that B2C customers have no permissions in the directory. Yeah, keeps things clean. What consideration should be kept in mind when doing sign in, sign out in the same browser session tab? With sign out, so sign out is a pretty involved topic because you have to think of it this way. Am I signing out of my application or am I signing out of all the applications, right? Am I also invalidating your refresh token? Am I doing a single sign out, as in like a sign out here, and then it signs me out, not just out of my applications, but also out of my ADFS federated IDP, because that's what we use in our organization, right? We use federation. So it depends on your requirements, but your sign out URL needs to handle all of those. It depends on your application requirements. When will MCell library support Pixie Grant Flow? We already do. So MCell browser already supports Pixie, MCell Angular, and MCell React are in preview currently. We call it private preview, but the GitHub repo is open and they do support Pixie. They're not something that we bless for production use right now because they are preview, but you're welcome to go and try those as well. Let's see, what other questions? Does Microsoft support true passwordless solutions? Can we enable QR code-based first factor? I mean, we do support passwordless solutions like MS Authenticator and FIDO keys. I don't think we support QR code unless it is B2C. How do we invalidate a refresh token? There's a Microsoft Graph call that allows you to invalidate refresh token either for yourself or a user ID. So if you can just Google for it, you'll find it. Otherwise, I'll try and find the link for you. Okay, but it's a simple Graph call. It's, I think, /user/refresh tokens or something like that. So, but it's just a simple Google search will tell you. Okay, let's go to the last demo here. Now, one of the challenges we've seen so far is if I go into portal.azure.com and I try to add, let's go ahead and get rid of this. And let's go back to the token cust web app. If I go to token configuration, and thank you, Harish. So there's a PowerShell way. Yes, that's a way to do it. But if an application wants to do it, then there's a Microsoft Graph call as well. So certainly the PowerShell way will work, but there's a Microsoft Graph call as well. So if I add an optional claim, let's pick ID token. What do I see here? It's a bunch of checkboxes, right? There's a whole bunch of checkboxes here. And what if I wanted to introduce a completely custom claim, like users preferred cuisine? That's not something that that we would dream of. Like at Microsoft, your requirements are very unique to yourself. The question is, can I introduce an entirely new checkbox with an entirely new value here? First, why would that be useful? Maybe you have a huge SQL Server database that has authorization decisions in it, and you want to drive those authorization decisions from that SQL Server database. But you'd like those claim values to show up here. How can we do that? The answer for that, yeah, so thanks, Harish. The link is user revoke sign-in sessions. Yeah, there you go. So, and I'll get to that other question in a second, Neil. So, how do I introduce a completely custom checkbox here? The answer is extension attributes. If you set a value on a user for an extension attribute and it's available, then that checkbox will automatically show up in this web page. There are two ways to set up extension attributes. Either you can set it through point and click in Azure AD Connect. Why would that be useful? hey, we have this attribute in our Active Directory, and we want that claim to appear in Azure AD issued tokens. So through AD Connect, you can do this mapping to an extension attribute, and it'll show up here. Or another way to do it is if you want more programmatic control, then we also support setting up extension attributes on using Microsoft Graph. So that's the approach I will show you, is how can you set this using Microsoft Graph. So I'm going to launch Postman. I have like 7 minutes left, so I'll go through this a little quick. So here. So the first step is that I need to create an extension, right? So I need to create an extension, and for the first thing I'm going to need is an access token. So let me fire up my terminal and grab an access token. So I'm just going to use Azure CLI to get me an access token, and this little script that I have will give me an access token. If you're interested in what this script looks like, it looks like this, get token.sh. So basically there's a command in Azure CLI that gets me an access token. I am logged into Azure CLI, and Azure CLI is an app. So this access token is okay to be used under my credentials for all the apps that this particular Azure CLI app registration has access to. And if you're interested in what that access token looks like and what is the scope for that, obviously Graph is part of that, but this is what my access token looks like, right? So I'm going to call Graph, so this token will work for Graph. So that's great. Now I'm going to save this access token because I will use it multiple places. So let me go ahead and put this in Notepad and put it on the side here. Let's dive back into Postman. And there is a call we support where we go to Microsoft Graph, v1.0 applications. This needs to be the object ID, not client ID, of the application where I'm making this modification. So let me grab that object ID. So that's the object ID. Let's put it here. And /extension properties, hopefully no typos. And if I go to body, this is the body I'm sending. Now I just need to put authorization information, which was my access token. So let me drop the access token that I just got and hit send. Now when I get this output, this is sort of confirming for me that a new extension property or attribute has been created for me. Now I'm going to need this GUID shortly. So what I'm going to do is that this output, I'm going to save it in another instance of Notepad. And this, you can obviously execute another GET request and find what extension attributes you have. But since I have this information right here, I'll just save this GUID. So let's put this on the side. Next thing I need to do is that I'm going to set a value for a user, right, on that particular extension attribute. So that particular extension attribute that I created, I'm going to get the right name for it here, like this. And here is the value I'm setting. And I'm making a call to graph.microsoft.com v1/users, and this is the user I'm setting this value on. I need to pass in an access token, as usual. So let me go ahead and put the right access token there and hit send. Now I get a 204 no content. What that tells me is that this call succeeded and the value has been created. I can get that extension attribute like this, and I can delete it and so on and so forth, right? Graph supports all of these operations. You can explore this further. Now that I have created this extension attribute, now I go into token configuration and add an optional claim, choose ID token. That extension attribute automatically shows up here, right? That's how simple it is. So I just created an extension attribute, it shows up here. Let's go ahead and check this checkbox and hit add, right? And if you notice that when I executed the value here, what value did I specify? The value was just some value, right? So now I'm going to sign in as the user on which I created this value. And let's see if that shows up, because I have put that customization in. So let's go ahead and hit this play button here. I can share all the code with you. So all the Postman collection, this code, I can share all of that. So I'll just share with Steven. He'll find a way to get it to you. So let me go ahead and sign in here and sign out. Let's request a new access ID token. So that's the user I had created that particular extension attribute on. And there you go. And this is how you can insert literally any arbitrary value inside. Of course, we don't do things like support multi-valued extension attributes because we don't want token bloat, right? But this is very powerful, as you can imagine. So let me quickly go through the questions as well. So where is the best place for someone relatively new to this to read up on use cases for expose an API, looking for something that references best practices? Well, the use case is that your application needs to call an API, a web service. That's where you would use that. So feel free to clarify your question further, but that's where you would expose an API. What should be considered B2B versus multi-tenant apps when designing solutions with Microsoft Identity? Any pros and cons? A multi-tenant app is, when you write an app, you want it to be available in not just your tenant, but other tenants. That's the scenario for that. So I highly suspect I'm missing some finer detail here, but again, please, feel free to elaborate on your question. Is there an open source repo that uses MSAL, v2.x, AD graph, and Xamarin Forms? Xamarin Forms that shows IAM flow and capability. So yeah, we have code samples for all of this. If you shoot me an email, then I can send you the open source repo that we reference. So that'll work. When to use the .default scope? I think you were talking about .default scope when requesting access token. There is a documentation page we have on that. We're trying to make it a little bit better, but again, shoot me an email. I'll email you the document page that we have on there. Is the Postman collection available anyway? So yes, we will make it available. Is there a plan to build a UI for managing extension attributes? There is a plan. I don't know where it is in the priority list, but there is a plan. I don't have any TA for you. However, I think if you look at the Postman collection, it's not hard to do it through the API as well. And I'll share all the code with you. So even if you had to build a UI on this yourself, it's a matter, it depends on the developer. You should be able to do it in a few hours. In my multi-tenant web application, I can only inject my custom claims into the claims principal as a part of OIDC. So I'm a little bit over time. Stephen, is it okay if we take another 5 minutes to go over the questions?
Yeah, it's okay as long as other people are okay with it. Let's go ahead.
Awesome. So in my multi-tenant web app, I can only inject my custom claims into the claims principal as a part of OIDC token validated login event. I sometimes need to do this after the login event. Okay, after you request for a new ID token and you do a single sign-in. So that's the only way, unfortunately. So do I need to be effectively a tenant admin to create an extension attribute? So I don't know what the permissions are, but here's an easy trick to find out what permissions you need. So for example, and I'll show you this generically. So you go to Microsoft, so let's go to Graph Explorer, aka.ms/ge, and you just basically paste in any API you're interested in here. For example, create extension attributes. So I'm going to paste this here. And when I do that, and I go to modify permissions, it tells you what permissions you need. So this is not based on your RBAC role, it is based on these permissions, unless you use delegated permission. And here you'll see that it also ranks these permissions in a low to high. So just pick the least available permission. It also tells you which one needs admin consent. So that's how you can find which permission you need. Let's see, where was the last question? Yeah. So we'll share the code. Great. What's best place? OK, so Harish already shared that link. Great. .default is client creds and implicit flow is where you would use .default. There is an article we have on this, and I can share that with you. So I think we've gone through all the questions. I hope this was useful and interesting to you. Personally, I think adding custom claims are very, very useful. So I hope you find use out of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Sahil, for taking the time today. If you have a few minutes, please let us know what other topics you would like us to cover next. So thank you so much, everyone.